So my special guest for our first session of the year of 2024 is a good friend of mine, Seth David. I've known Seth for a number of years now. I forget where I first met Seth. It was in the US at either QB Connect or Scaling Heights or something. And I had the pleasure to be on his podcast recently. He's doing some amazing things in the accounting profession over in the US and Canada. So on that note, if Seth is there, let me bring him in. Hi there, Seth. How are you doing?
Hello. Thank you, Mark. What an honor and what a pleasure.
It's great because I know we mentioned this on the podcast. I think the last time actually we saw each other face to face was a long time ago now. It was in Salt Lake City, which I think was June of 2019, if I remember right.
Yes, it was.
And I'm pretty sure.
And where we originally met was, in fact, QuickBooks Connect. It was.
Yes.
I think I actually have a memory of you and your wife sitting at a table just outside the Fairmont Hotel, enjoying a meal and walking by you. And I don't know if that's where we actually met, but I remember stopping and talking. And it was like, I know you. Yeah, I know you. And it was obviously it's just always a pleasure to talk with you, Mark.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, we did QB Connect 5 times in San Jose, and every time we arrived at the Fairmont, we went and sat in the sun at that same little cafe restaurant just outside. So we met quite a few people there. We probably did meet you, I guess, at that event. So it's great to have you on because I know that you've got some fascinating stories and also lots of great tips and things you're going to share. But let me start off with a question just for those people. I know Anik knows you, but probably many people might not. So if we were to meet for the first time in an elevator and we had 60 seconds before I was to get off on my floor and I asked you the question, so Seth, what do you do? How would you answer that?
It depends on how sarcastic I'm feeling at the moment, but in all seriousness, I would explain that to describe where we're at today without going through all of history, it would be as simple as I produce and develop an educational platform for accountants and bookkeepers, and probably a sprinkling of small business owners who want to learn from me how to do accounting as well as develop better systems for running a firm, doing things more efficiently, more effectively, and with greater accuracy.
Awesome answer. And I know you do some amazing stuff because I hear great things about you from other people in the profession. So how do you get to where you are today? Tell us a bit about your story. I know a little bit about it. It's a fascinating story, but let's hear how you got to where you are today.
So it's a long story. So I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. I'm dating myself there. Actually, I learned recently Reader's Digest is still around. I didn't know that. But so I got my accounting degree from Pace University, which is in New York. Prior to that, I was actually a computer science major. So out of high school, I studied computer science, then actually left college, found myself on Wall Street with a Series 7 license at age like 21, selling stocks and things. And then went back to school to get the accounting degree. During that time, as is often associated with Wall Street, my use of drugs really took off, and it was a work hard, party hard kind of lifestyle that I learned to live back in those days. So it was like, we would show up to work, we'd be sort of clean, during market hours, but at 4 p.m. when the bell rung, we would be like on the roof smoking pot and then get back down and get on the phones and start pitching people trying to open up accounts. And, we had it strategically planned out. As the day progressed, we would start calling further west in the US, because they're behind us time-wise. So, by the end of our evening, we're calling California because it's still just the end of their workday. I don't know why I brought that up, but anyway, that was the lifestyle, right? And then we'd leave and go party. We'd go drink and do drugs and still show up the next morning, amazingly. But we had the aid of drugs eventually to keep us awake when we still had to show up early that morning. And so by the time I got my accounting degree, that life at first it slowed down. When I went back to school, I was like, okay, I'm in school, I got to be serious about this. But I still maintained some of that, like, all right, go to class, study, take notes, I need to get good grades. But then once I know I've gotten my A for the day, which is something I learned from my brother actually, which means I studied the material that I needed to learn for that day from whatever classes I took, then I would go out and I used to like Foster's beer in those days, and I would drink beer and smoke weed basically as my way of, I used to say those days, some people like to unwind with a glass of wine when they come home for the day. For me, it's, it's other forms of alcohol and pot. And then, on the weekends, we get the harder drugs in the mix until the weekends got expanded to like starting Thursdays and going into Monday. And then eventually the whole thing just caught up with me. So long story short, by the time I was 28, I was in rehab, and eventually one rehab for like 30 days wasn't enough. I ended up in California in a 6-month treatment program in 1999. And, so it was April 4th, 1999 was the last time I had anything that affects me from the neck up. April 5th of 99 is my clean date, which if you do the math means I'm almost 25 years clean. And then, so I forgot the part about the career. So getting out of rehab, of course, it's like time to find a job. And so I went to a temp agency. I had the accounting degree, so that was, a big benefit. It made it easy to find jobs. And that was one thing. When I had gone back to school and I was trying to decide what sort of track to take, my dad said, look, you can go for finance, which is typical of people who want to work on Wall Street, is you get a finance degree and you stay in that world. He said, but with an accounting degree, you'll always be able to find work no matter what. And I knew that my father, by then I was old enough to know, even though I often disagreed with him, but for all the wrong reasons. But I knew enough to know by then his approach, his answer to anything was going to be the most practical. So I took his advice and I said, let me get the accounting degree. And sure enough, it made it easy to find work. When I got out of rehab, I worked through a temp agency, worked a couple of jobs, and then eventually got hired full time at one of those jobs. And, then eventually left and worked for a CPA firm. And while I was at that CPA firm, and by the way, I hated every job I had after I got clean. Every job started off great, and then it went completely sideways, to where I couldn't stand the people I was working for, one experience after another. And so that last CPA firm that I worked at was what really catapulted me into starting my own thing, because I was like, I'm the common denominator here, And so it's got to be me. That's one of the things I learned in my process of recovery, was to really look at things from that perspective and really say, how do I own this? How do I make this my responsibility? And from that perspective, I was able to say, well, I'm the common denominator, like 3 jobs in a row. I can't stand who I'm working for. Sure, maybe it's them. Maybe they were narcissistic, and they were. Some of the people I worked for were downright abusive. But that doesn't matter. Bottom line is I have to take responsibility. I love the expression, if I'm pointing a finger at you, I've got 3 fingers pointed right back at me, which is kind of a metaphor for I have to take 3 times the responsibility that I'm giving you for everything that happens to me. And that's what I did. And so I'm the common denominator. In those days, I was placing ads on Craigslist to pick up little side jobs that I was doing. I would leave the CPA firm at lunch instead of eating to go see a client. Work with them on whatever they hired me to help them do, and then run back to the office, hoping they wouldn't notice, like what I was doing. And then, again, very long story, much shorter. I eventually started Nerd Enterprises as a DBA in 2003, I want to say. Yeah, I think 2003. And by 2007, I had incorporated, and that was when I was like, I'm going all in with this. I had gone to work for one of my clients. Once again, bad experience, right back, said, okay, I've now run that experiment for the last time. I cannot work for somebody else. I will never be happy in that environment. And boom. So it never looked back after that.
Awesome. And I don't know if you saw, there've been lots of comments about the 25 years, which is awesome. Congratulations on that. I mean, it's a extraordinary story. I remember the first time I heard it. Now, I did manage, you did 25 years. I did manage myself this week 2.5 days without drinking. And that's only because Sarah and I go on vacation tomorrow for nearly 2 weeks into Madeira. It's our winter vacation. And we will probably end up, the problem with living in Portugal now is the wine's too good. So I couldn't imagine 25 years. That's really, really impressive.
Well, your timing's good, by the way, because apparently I'm just learning that there's this thing that I've never heard of before, but I get the sense that it has been around for a while, called dry January, where I suspect it's like a Hollywood thing. It probably it feels like one of those things that started in Hollywood right here in Los Angeles where I live, where they stop drinking for the month of January, I guess, because at the holidays people tend to drink more. And for me, as somebody who's been, clean and sober for almost 25 years, it cracks me up to think like, really? You're just going to try and stay sober for a month? Good luck with that. I hope that works out.
Yes, I know.
Because I
I think
couldn't do that.
no, I think Sarah's done a dry. She'll probably correct me now, but she's, I think, done a dry January or a dry month and done very, very well. I just don't have the discipline. But then I suppose my advantage is I'm so slight built. I can't take much alcohol, so it's for me. It's very, very little and very often.
Well, and I want to bring something up there. I want to mention one thing that's really important because look, not everybody's going to have a problem like I did, obviously. In fact, most don't. I'm in the minority of people who have an affliction and here's the key. I had a client once, and he was a daily pot smoker and he was very respectful. Once he knew I was in recovery, he would go upstairs to a different room. I used to come to his house. That's where he ran his business out of. And he would go up there, he would smoke a little and then go on and get on the phones. He liked to sell while he was smoking pot. And frankly, he was good at it. And one day at lunch, he asked me if I thought he had a problem. And I said, I can't diagnose that for you. It's something that we make clear. You have to diagnose it for yourself. And I said, I can give you 2 questions to consider. And I said, and don't answer them now. Think about it. 1, can you stop when you want to? 2, can you control the amount you take? And I said, if you can answer yes, and he started to answer, I said, nope, we'll talk next week when I see you again. But think about it for the next week. Can you stop when you want to? Can you control the amount you take? If you can answer yes, honestly, to those questions, then you're probably all good. Not everybody's going to be an addict or an alcoholic. Studies and evidence in the medical profession have confirmed that there is a difference between somebody who is a, quote, real alcoholic or real addict versus somebody who can just have a few glasses of wine and say, you know what, I have to work tomorrow. I got to stop here. I reached a point where I couldn't, even if I said, yeah, I got to stop here, I couldn't stop. The obsession would kick in and I just had to have more. And there was no end in sight once I started.
Seth, I love your honesty. It's amazing. It's funny. Neil said that I can test on Mark being a bad influence. I find that a really strange comment from Neil because he came to Portugal we have twice a year a Portugal retreat for Value Pricing Academy members. Neil's been to both of them last year. And every time we finished the day session and the evening session, he'd go off to the bar and was a bad influence on the rest of the delegates. Neil, let me just remind you of that. You were a bad influence, you and John. So you just going back to your story then. So you then started your own accounting firm, which I believe, Seth, you then sold that firm, did you?
Just 2023, just this past year. I did sell off all but 2 clients. At this point, I had 2 bookkeepers working with me, Erica, who was my original hire, and then Kelly. And Erica had most of the clients by this time. And so it was actually a year ago now that I had just started reading Ron Baker's book on the subscription pricing model. And I said, all right, I'm going to go all in with this concept. And I found a new client where I applied this concept. And I was charging them a big monthly fee, like a 5-figure monthly fee. And it went great at first and then went completely sideways to the point where it was becoming completely disruptive of my other efforts and where I really wanted to have my attention placed, which was in the educational stuff and building and designing new courses and, building the educational platform that I've been working so hard for so many years to build. So it was like, I didn't even care about the money. It was getting downright frustrating. And it was one of these clients where they didn't want to do anything I suggested. They were recording capital leases the wrong way. I actually had to pull up the FASB regs and highlight the pieces that explained to confirm, because this guy was like their VP of finance and he was adamantly disagreeing with me, like, no, it doesn't have to be recorded that way. And I'm like, yes, it does. And, not only that, but if anybody understands capital leases, there's not really a stated interest rate. You sort of have to back into it. And I was trying to put together that analysis so that I could analyze what it was really costing him and then look for financing. I was trying to be like a CFO, imagine. And he wouldn't let me do my job. that I was hired to do, because he was just fighting me tooth and nail every step of the way. And at that point, it was like I hit this tipping point where I honestly said, so it's not like one of these stories where it's like, oh, I built up this amazing firm and it was so successful, I sold it off. No, not me. I sold it off because I was sick and tired of it. And I had a conversation with Erica one day where I expressed how I was feeling, and she knew it. She could see it whenever we'd talk. And so she threw out the comment saying, well, if you ever want to have that conversation about selling the clients off to me, I'm willing to entertain that. And I kind of said, like, hold that thought. And like 2 months later, I said, yeah, you know what? Let's do it. Let's pull the trigger. I want out. I'm done. Like, I can't stand dealing with clients anymore. That's honestly, look, I'm known for that. I'm just going to be brutally honest. I'm not going to try and paint the pretty picture of, that's just not true. So.
Wow. I sold my accounting firm in 2006, and it wasn't so much because I hated it. In fact, for the last 3 years of my accounting firm, I didn't do a single day's worth of work in the firm. Between 2003 and 2006, it was being run by my client managers. I was a big fan, and I first came across, back end of 1998, I first came across Michael Gerber and the E-Myth Revisited, and that was a light bulb moment when I read that and realized, being a sole practitioner in 1998, I was doing it, even had a team of people, I did everything, absolutely everything, because everything was carried around in my head. And I read the E-Myth and I thought, wow, that's a better way to do things. So I spent the next few years figuring out how to take everything in my head and put it into systems. And I systemized every part of my business and then got the team running it. And until they eventually bought it off me. And it wasn't because I hated it. It was because of the things I was doing in the area of pricing. I was then invited to speak at a conference in February 2000 to over 100 accountants. It was my second speaking engagement, which was pretty scary. But I realized that certainly in the UK back then, that my message is something the profession needed to hear, how to change the way that we price. And I was then asked to speak regularly, and I realized I enjoyed doing the speaking, going to conferences, helping other accountants way more than working with other business owners. I enjoyed that stuff, but I just really loved helping the profession. So we both sold accounting firms. Yours is much more recent than mine then, Seth. So any kind of key learning points? What did you learn from the process of going through trying to sell an accounting firm?
Well, one thing that I insisted on, which I think actually caused Erica a bit of frustration in the process, but ultimately I think she understood why it was this important to me. And this was based not on what I learned, excuse me, through this experience, but rather what I've learned for many years up until this experience, which is I wanted to make sure that we were 1000% crystal clear in our agreement. And so we went back and forth quite a bit on the agreement that we were to sign. And, at one point she came back to me, and I'm sure she thought I was going to just sign it. But there's one area in it that was a little vague in terms of, what it really came down to was the deal surrounding, okay, you're going to get these clients. How do we make sure they stay with you? So of course there's always, language in there that explains, and traditionally I know that what's done is, you sell the firm, you sell the clients, and you agree on a fee, but it's based on sort of a contingency and a percentage of what they collect each year, for 5 years. And if they end up increasing the revenues, great. But if they lose clients, then they're paying you less of a percentage. So you may end up getting actually less. We agreed differently. We said, no, let's just come up with a flat fee. We agreed on a payment plan, based on what that total fee was. We based the fee on 1 year's worth of revenues from all the clients. But then we got into some of the, like into the weeds on some of the details. Like some clients have 2 or 3 companies. What if they don't bring all 3 companies along, and that kind of thing? And so the agreement left some things open that were a little bit vague, and I pushed back. And I know she got annoyed with me at one point, and I didn't blame her for that necessarily, but I just made the point clear. And I think ultimately she understood. I said, we were friends before we ever entered into any kind of a working relationship. And the last thing I would want, the most tragic thing to me, would be if that friendship got destroyed in this final hour over us trying to come to terms on this, or what might happen right afterwards. So I said, for that reason, I want to be 1000% crystal clear. I don't want any vagueness in the agreement. So if there is a question as to what happens if, a client only brings over 2 of their companies out of their 3, then we need to specify the exact value of each of those companies under this agreement so that there's no question. There can't be any arguments. Okay, this company didn't come over. The agreement says that was worth this much. That's what we exclude from the payment plan. Done. So I was a little bit of a pain in the ass about it, but frankly, I think it was for good reason. And I think and as it turns out, everybody came over 100%. So in the end, it was like, we didn't need to worry about it, but you never know. Before you sign the agreement and actually see what happens, you just don't know. So this way we covered all possible contingencies that we could be aware of. We put a value on everything that we could. And this way there's nothing to argue about if something doesn't go the way we expect or hope. That's probably the most important thing in doing a deal like this with somebody, especially somebody that you care about.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And there's a lot of similarities to my story. In the UK, we call it, I think, a clawback arrangement, where if clients then leave, there's a reduction in the fee. And I started out when I realized I loved helping accountants. My first thought was the usual route to sell it to a third party. The big problem I had in the UK was a tax issue, because I was trading as a corporate entity. So what happens if you're a corporate and you sell what happens is the buyer is going to want to buy the client base, not the shares. And so you sell the client base and the company makes a capital gain on that and pays corporation tax on that. And then when you take the money out of it, out of the company, you then pay capital gains tax twice. It's a crazy system, but so it's actually better to if it's a corporate, to sell the shares. And a third party wouldn't do that because potential liabilities or whatever, hidden stuff. So that's why I went down the route of talking to my team, and that's partly why it took between 2003 and 2006, because in 2003 they were client managers. They weren't in a position to buy a firm. And I wasn't desperate for the money because I was making money through helping accountants by then. And so I said, look, let's just take it steady. Let's me act as your mentor and get you to a position where you are running this business. And then in 2006, they saved up enough money they could buy it off me. And there was no need to talk about clawbacks and stuff, because for the previous 3 years, they've been running the practice, essentially. They knew the clients. For me, I built in a discount. I might have made more money selling it to an accounting firm, but with the tax issues as well, I was much more motivated to do something for the guys that were working for me, that had been working for me for many years.
Yeah. I had somebody encourage me because I had talked to somebody who had just sold their bookkeeping practice, and I told them what I was considering doing with Erica, and they suggested to me that, oh, you should get a business broker, and there might be, and for me, it just wasn't about that. Like, I just wanted out, number one. Number two, the beauty of this was that Erica was the one who had been doing all their work for years, like for almost a decade, similar to your situation. The clients knew her. Some of them didn't know her as well because she was in the background and I was the front person talking to them more. But what I was able to do, of course, was when I sent the email to the clients announcing this arrangement, one of the first things I said was, nothing's going to change for you, because it's the same person who's been doing your work for, the last decade or whatever, who's going to continue to work. Literally, the only thing changing is who you're getting the invoice from. That's it. So yeah. I was able to, it was very easy that way to kind of sell the clients on making the transition, by just making it clear. And it was the truth, of course, that, hey, nothing's really changing except where your money's going. It's just not going to go through me anymore.
Yeah. I have had my first question. We've got the first question come in from somebody. It's from Neil. Neil says, did you ever acquire any accountancy firms when you were in business?
No, I came very close to working with a CPA who had very much been my mentor over the years. Rest in peace. His name was Barry Goldstein. And we started something. I actually owned a domain called consolidatedbookkeeping.com. And we were in the process of putting the plan together where he was going to put up the money. We were going to buy these firms. He was going to handle their taxes. I was going to handle the financial accounting and bookkeeping. It never actually happened, though. So I came close, but never did it. And at this point, certainly wouldn't want to.
No, obviously. No, it was never something that I considered either, because obviously you're paying a multiple of fees. In the UK, it's typically 1 to 1.2 times. And The problem with acquiring another business, another firm, is you've got to suddenly get to know you've suddenly got a whole bunch of clients you've got to get to know, and also then you've got to pay for them, which can be expensive. My view was, just get good at marketing,
Yeah.
and build up your client base that way. That was always my view. I do know of some accountants who have built incredible firms through an acquisition strategy, but I think you have to be really all in on that strategy. For me,
Yeah, I mean, there's
marketing is the
Michael
way.
Lee, who is almost sort of famous for, acquiring firms, and that's how he's built his firm, as I understand it.
Yeah, I don't know Michael. I don't think I
Oh,
do.
all right.
Yeah.
You can Google him. Michael
Hmm.
Lee, spelled Ly.
Sort of
He
rings a
used
bell.
to be on the there was that like late night accountant podcast with Hector Garcia
Yep.
and Andrew Wall, and Michael Lee was on there
Oh, okay.
originally. Yeah,
Yeah.
so he was
Yeah. Yes. I was on Andrew Wall's podcast just a few weeks back. That was fun.
okay.
Yeah. Let's move on from selling and buying accounting firms. Let's talk about what should we talk about? There's so many things we could cover. So you've sold the firm now. Now what you are doing is I guess the same as me, helping the accounting profession. And so what sort of things what sort of content do you create? What sort of things do you teach?
So I have my core sort of, and it's like a sub brand I've built around this concept of bulletproof bookkeeping. I actually got the trademark for bulletproof bookkeeping and bulletproof accounting. And obviously, as you can probably guess from the name, it refers to having like an impenetrable set of books, meaning I can stand behind every number. I can show the audit trail. I can prove every number on the balance sheet, within, as we say in the accounting world, with reasonable assurance, right? So and that's the idea behind it, which means in translation, what does that look like in the bookkeeping? It means in many cases, while there might be 2 or 3 or more ways to record something, we are going to go the route that's usually going to take a little bit more work so that the numbers behind the number tell the right story, and so that it's easy to prove why the number is accurate according. And sometimes it's a subtle little thing, like I can write off bad debt with a little product or service on an invoice or a sales receipt that reduces the amount of the original sale. And to me, that would not be bulletproof. I would call that bullet hole, because it just tells the wrong story. If you're not looking closely, if you're just looking on the surface, it looks, oh, and by the way, using like a discount item instead of something that says bad debt. So that tells the wrong story. It almost makes it sound like the opposite sentiment, as in, hey, this is good faith, goodwill. We like this customer, so we want to give them a discount, as opposed to, no, this customer didn't pay me. We're parting company and we have to write off what they owed us, So to me, there's some of these very subtle little differences in how I teach people how to do the bookkeeping that ensure, and the way I think of it from the mind of an auditor, which I used to be, right? So I think if I'm an auditor scrutinizing these books, what can I do to put the books together in such a way that it will raise less questions, right? And satisfy them more quickly, as opposed to, hey, even if it ultimately is correct, it doesn't look right. It looks funny. It raises questions. Now I want to dig deeper to make sure, right? And so in essence and on the surface, that's kind of the difference to me between bulletproof bookkeeping and something that I would not call bulletproof. So those are the bulletproof courses. And of course, I have the mastery course, which is just the basic foundation principles of bookkeeping and how to do everything. And then I've got industry specific ones. In fact, I'm close to completing by the end of this year. I believe I will have completed my entire portfolio of sort of real estate based bulletproof bookkeeping courses. I've always loved the real estate industry. I have brokers and agents. I have property management. I am, as we speak, writing property owners and flippers. And then I have one more to do on commercial property management, which I wasn't going to do. But I guess because of where you can say I now sit in this accounting world, I get a lot of people approaching me about different apps and things. And I ran across a company I was introduced to by a colleague who has an app that beautifully handles the commercial property management accounting and integrates with QBO. I don't think there's any other app but theirs that does this. And the key that I'm honing in on there, the real trick to this is what, we refer to as triple net leases, where you have common area. You think of a shopping mall and they're paying their rent, but then there's common areas that they also have to contribute to for the cleanup and maintenance and so on. So that's where the accounting in that area gets very tricky. So that's the core. Bulletproof bookkeeping and all of these courses center around QuickBooks Online, because that's my favorite accounting product and has been for quite some time.
Of course. Yeah, understandable. And you're quite into tech, aren't you?
Yes. Then the other general area of courses I have is under what I call under the heading of process and workflow design. Right. And actually, I've now, at the end of last year, I launched my latest course, which is Bulletproof Notion Work Management System. Yeah. And I was reading this book called Come Up for Air. The author's name is Nick Sonnenberg. And he, instead of project management, refers to it as work management. And I love this idea. It might seem like it's semantics, but sometimes semantics play a big role in mindset, right? And not everything we do is a project. In fact, much of what we do is not a project. It's projects plus all the one-off tasks and all the internal things. And there's like a plethora of other things that we do that really aren't a project. So I love the idea that his term work management, which I've now adopted, I've borrowed it from him. I think it just much better describes what we need to do in the bigger picture is we need to manage all of our work.
And that's, I think, something that we both got in common is this whole thing around productivity, processes, getting things done. I mentioned earlier that I big fan of Michael Gerber, his message, and I know we were chatting a few weeks back about productivity hacks, stuff like that. The one thing that was interesting is we both use tech quite a bit, but we have you and I have completely different tech stacks. So you're a big fan of Notion. We have embedded in our business Trello, and we use that for so many things. In fact, the business wouldn't run without Trello. We'd struggle. So let's talk about let's go a bit deeper on some of that stuff. In fact, Derek's just said, I've just seen Derek says dwell more on process design, Seth. So let's talk a bit about some productivity and processes, and what are some of your top hacks for getting stuff done?
So how deep into the rabbit hole do we want to go? Because just what I'm working on literally in the last couple of days, it's very deep in the weeds on like database setup and relationships and relational databases. So happy to go there if we want, but let's start a little simpler. One of the things that it has become like religion for me. I've been obsessed with productivity apps and trying to figure out really why is it that so many, let's just focus on the accounting industry, but I think it's beyond that. But why is it that so many people still struggle? You have so many apps out there. You would think among them, everybody could find one of these that really solves their workflow process management problem. And yet I so consistently, almost everyone I talk to, it seems, will admit, even if it's just one-on-one, they'll admit it, that they still struggle trying to get to a place where they feel, where the feeling is there, that like, imagine you wake up, and some days we all do experience this. It's like you wake up, you know exactly what's in front of you. This is exactly what I need to do. I can get laser focused and very quickly and easily get into what's called a flow state, where it's almost like there's no thought process going on. If you were able to read my mind, it would be silence because I'm just going. Right? That's what a flow state. We've all felt that. And I'm actually in the process of studying a book that describes how you can more intentionally produce that state, because it used to be something that it was just, first, it was only reserved for like professional athletes who had really honed their craft. And then it was just thought even then that it just happened by accident. Like you couldn't actually do anything proactive to induce that state, but science has shown otherwise at this point. So anyway, the point is, I got obsessed, and I'm still obsessed with this idea that, why can't more people get there with whatever apps they're using? And I have a theory behind it. And I want to share this because I think this is so important. My theory is that people are doing it backwards. And what I mean by that is I'll use a specific example, an app that's very commonly used. It's funny. I'm very impressed that you guys are using Trello. I remember playing with that years ago, and I didn't think anybody used Trello anymore. I mean, I knew it was there, and for years I had this legacy subscription for $5 a month, so I kept it because I was like, it's $5 a month. It seemed stupid not to, until like 5 years of $60 a year went by, and I'm like, okay, this is stupid, and I just let it go. But every once in a while, I'm like, I kind of miss it. Like, I want to go back and play with it, because to me, a lot of these apps are like toys that are fun to play with. But for most people, they just want an app that works, that they can use and get to their desk every day and say, all right, this is the list of things I have to do. And so let me tie this into what I think the issue is so we hear about an app, we hear everybody's using Asana or everybody's using ClickUp. So I'm maybe I should just use Asana or just use. All right, so I'm going to use ClickUp because everybody's talking about ClickUp, and I'm going to dive in and I'm going to go and I'm going to set up my spaces and my lists and my folders and my tasks and my subtasks and start putting data in there. And at first, it's great because it's minimal. You don't have a lot of data, and then you hit this like critical mass where it's like, I don't know where anything is anymore. Right. So you say, all right, well, that didn't work. So then you grab the next app and you do the same thing and you basically have the same experience. Maybe it takes a little longer this time. Maybe it's a little faster, but eventually you reach that same point where you're like, everything's all over the place. I'm trying to find a document that I created for a client in Google Sheets 6 months ago. I have no idea where the heck it is. So anyway, here's my theory as to what the real issue is. The real issue is that we think the app is the system, when in reality, we're doing it backwards because we're picking the app first and figuring that's going to somehow prescribe the system. And that's the problem. If you study a book, and I've gone very thoroughly once again through David Allen's Getting Things Done in the past year, like all of last year, I was in this book studying, and I don't just read these things and say, oh, that was nice. I study them. I go slow. I make notes. I say, how am I going to take what I just read and implement it very specifically and in gross detail into how I work? And so he gives you the layout, for example, for how to classify your tasks. There's things that are scheduled. There's next action items. There's someday maybe. So he has a whole diagram, and I use that to create statuses for my tasks. So, and what I'm getting at, bigger picture, just to zoom back out, is we need to define the system first for how we work. It should be a system that can be implemented devoid of any apps. You should be able to do it with a notebook and a pen. Then you choose the app, so the app is the tool that you use to execute that system, but the two should be very visibly separate things. So, and then I believe if you approach it that way and have a really well-defined system, and Getting Things Done is a proven system. So with Bulletproof Notion, I combined a lot of stuff from Getting Things Done with a lot of stuff from Nick Sonnenberg's Come Up for Air. And then a lot of other sources, like there was an app I was playing with last year for a while that's a competitor to Notion. And I started playing with it. The guys reached out to me because they saw some of my videos on Notion and some of my much older videos on Evernote. And they said, we'd love for you to check out our app. I said, I'm happy to. They gave me an account. I played with it. Long story short, it was mostly developed for Apple and iOS. And a lot of the features that were developed for that platform were not available for Android. And I said, guys, if you ever develop for Android, I'd be happy to take another look. But until then, for that reason, I'm out. I love that Shark Tank line. For that reason, I'm out. But in my travels, playing with their app and reading their documentation, and by the way, if I choose to use an app, I'm going to read their documentation. I am going to learn everything I can about the app and the company behind it and everything that it can do. And most importantly, I want to find out what it can't do or just can't do well. And so with their app, there was some documentation I read that talked about the daily journal concept that they employ and how that becomes central to the whole rest of the system, which at first I thought, well, that seems weird, especially accountants are very sort of practically minded people by and large. Like nobody's going to feel like they have time to write a daily journal until I learned what they were talking about in terms of how this is done. And yes, you can write your thoughts throughout the day. And I think that's good and important to do. I have people in my program now who admit that since they started doing that, their thoughts are much better organized and they have a much clearer picture of what to do throughout the day and what their schedule can, should, and does look like. But more importantly, we're documenting everything we do in the form of a timeline, which is one of the dimensions in which our brains think is timeline. We think in two dimensions, time and space. So the daily journal creates the timeline, and each day's entry, I'm peppering it with links to the client I talked to that day, to the task that I worked on that day. And it's the perfect place when I get these fleeting thoughts throughout the day that I don't have to think for more than 2 seconds where to go to capture that thought so I don't forget it. So that eliminates a ton of stress. So, but again, going back to the bigger picture, issue here. It's you've got to have the system first, and then the app is, like I said, it's the tool that you use to execute the system, but it's not the system. Two separate things. And I think that's
And
what's
that's,
really grossly missing.
yeah, and that's genius. And Tracy said the same thing, because it got me thinking that I just latched on to Trello, and it was my daughter Gabby actually said Trello's great before she started working for us. And since then, other people have said, "Oh, you want to use Notion? That's great." And I think they're all great. They're all great tools, but as you rightly say, it's about figuring out the system. Because when I first got Trello, I first got it, and it's like a blank canvas. And I thought, what the hell do you do with this? I had no idea. But its big strength is the fact you can do pretty much anything. You just need to know what you want to use it for. So we use it for so many different things. We have boards for brainstorming. We have boards for projects. The board that I have open every single day is my work planner. So every week I know exactly what I'm doing, and Trello's very visual. That's what I love about it. But I don't think it's necessarily better than Notion. It's just the fact that we've spent a lot of time figuring out what's our system and how do we build that into Trello. So thank you for sharing that. That was
my theory, by the way, just to cap that off with one last comment, is if you have a really well-defined system, any of these apps will work well for you. Any of them.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. Neil asked a question. Let me just go to that. He says, is there a specific app that you'd recommend for calendar productivity? He says, I've seen Motion, which looks cool.
So it's funny you mentioned that, because literally just yesterday, Notion rolled out this really slick Google Calendar integration. And I'm always worried about these kind of integrations because I'm afraid if I connect them, it's going to clutter up my Google Calendar with all kinds of stuff that I don't want at that level. For me, it's important, first of all, before we even consider, choosing an app like that, is how do we use the calendar? For me, the calendar is for big picture time blocking, So if you look at my Google Calendar right now, you'll see that after this podcast recording today, the whole rest of the day, in this case, happens to be blocked off for one particular client that I work with. And it's only because there's a lot of stuff I want to work on for them. And so I want to get ahead. So I blocked off the whole day on Thursday every week for this client to get 100% focus, which means no calls, no appointments, pretty much clean out my inbox in the morning. So that's out of the way and off the decks. And I know that I don't have to worry about responding anything for at least another 24 hours. And so my calendar is used for big picture time blocking. And I know some people who've played with Motion. I like what I see so far with this Notion. So we have Motion with an M, and then we have Notion with an N, right? So I like what I see so far with Notion, although I've only had a few minutes to play with it, because literally just yesterday, as of the day we're recording this, is when they rolled it out. But what I like is, for example, how many times you realize, okay, I've got a call scheduled with so-and-so. It's on my calendar. I click in, it's got the Zoom info, whatever. But I'm like, oh, crap, where am I going to go to take notes? I forgot to take the time to open up a notes page in my knowledge management app, right? Which is what Notion does really well. So now it brings your Google Calendar into Notion's version of that calendar. I can click on an appointment and click an option to start a note, to start a new page in Notion. And then, of course, I can choose from a dropdown which database that goes in and so forth. Even that I don't love, though, because now I have to stop and think, oh, God, I got to search for the right database, right? So I don't love that, but I'm going to play with it and see if I can fall in love with it. But either way, the point being, the idea of an app that somehow automatically manages my time for me and tries to figure it out. I haven't played with Motion with an M, but I don't trust it. And maybe I should play with it. I know a couple of people who said they used it, but I haven't gotten like overwhelming, like, oh my God, this is amazing, life-changing, game-changing kind of app. I've heard some people say, yeah, it's pretty good, but I feel like I will do a much better job of managing those blocks on my own calendar, and everything's integrated with Calendly. So in Calendly, what I do, and here's another pro tip, I guess you could call it. But with Calendly, I set up the availability on my booking calendars on a much broader perspective than what I really expect to make available, knowing that that's linked to my Google Calendar. And then I manage it from my Google Calendar, where I just put busy blocks in places where I don't want anybody making an appointment with me. So, and to me, that's much easier than trying to manage it from two places.
Awesome. And Neil says, great feedback. Thanks, Seth. One other quick question for you, Seth. Alexandra asked a question earlier. Can you, hang on, no, not that one, sorry. It's, what's the name of the app for commercial real estate you spoke of before?
I was trying to keep my cards in my deck. All right, I'll spill it. It's called Stratafolio.
Okay.
Strata folio. And I got a good deep demo with it, and it looks awesome. And plus, I don't know of any other app out there that can manage the commercial real estate and integrate with QBO.
Cool. And then a couple of people, including Alexander, asked you to share the name of the book again, but I think Tracy did that. That was David Allen, Getting Things Done.
That one, and also Come Up for Air by Nick Sonnenberg. Now, speaking of tech stacks, by the way, on that line, so I love Nick Sonnenberg's concepts, but I hate the apps he uses. So I just take what he teaches in concept and I've employed it in Notion, and there's a little bit of overlap, but he loves Asana. I can't stand Asana. I've tried to like Asana several times in my career and can't bring myself to do it. So fine. So the stuff he's doing in Asana, I do in Notion.
Okay, great. One more question, and then I'm going to, from somebody else, and then I want to explore something with you. But Mark Rayner says, Seth, do you have something that helps manage tasks inside a calendar? As in, I have tasks I have to do, and I have times available to work on them, but it's a block on the calendar and the tasks.
So on the calendar, I may have a block of time that says like catch up and clean up or something like that. So I will never get that detailed to describe a specific task in my calendar. That's where that's where my work management system comes in, which again for me is Notion. And in Notion, I have everything, of course, organized by client, and within each client, all the things I have to do for that client. And so that will populate on a calendar. The way my system is set up right now is based on having a separate calendar for each client. And then each client, then there's a client calendar. So I could say, all right, today's Thursday, I'm going to work on this one client. And then I can go into this one client's area and see all the things I wanted to work on. Right. I'm in the process. I mentioned earlier, I was doing like a deep dive the last couple of days on relational databases and database management, specifically with respect to how to set up Notion. So I've basically unlocked a whole new way of organizing things that I'm still testing to make sure that it doesn't break. And this is what I do, by the way, when I'm kind of trying to test out a new system or a new way of using an existing system. I just wrote about this recently, and it seems to have gotten a good response from people, which is that I try to break it, and then I fix it, and then I break it again, and then I fix it, and I keep doing that until I can't break it anymore. And once I'm satisfied I can no longer break it, then I will sort of implement it and put it into action. So I haven't tested this new way yet, but bottom line, right now, if I'm working on stuff and I have like a general block of time with no specific appointments and I just want to catch up, all those details are organized in Notion. I can pull up a list of things that are classified as today. And the way that's actually configured is it's anything with a due date of today or prior, because there may be things that weren't critical that I had scheduled for a few days ago, and I may not have bothered to update them. So this way, my today pile captures anything that isn't done yet, that was either already supposed to be done or already wanted to do it. So bottom line, something doesn't get like left behind and then lost in the shuffle somehow. And then I'll go in. The first thing I'll do when I start looking at those tasks is either move everything over to today. So I just have one clear, concise list of all the today stuff. And then I will clarify it using David Allen's language from Getting Things Done. Here's the basic system. We capture, clarify, organize, reflect, and engage with everything we need to do. That's how well I've studied this book, is that I can spit that out for you verbatim according to what he teaches. So captured, it's already there in Notion. I've captured it. But now what I'm talking about doing is clarifying. Right? I'm clarifying, what does this task mean to me? Does it really need to get done today? Can I defer it? Right? Maybe it really doesn't need to be on the calendar. Maybe I should move it into a next action item because there's no particular time I need to get it done. It's just something I want to do soon. Right? So I do that process almost daily with what I have in my today pile in Notion. And I just quick decision. If I can get it done in 2 minutes, do it. If it's going to take more than 2 minutes, then I either schedule it or defer it or delegate it. Right. And then everything kind of falls in line from there. So all the details, going back to the actual question, are tracked in my work management system. The calendar is just high level, as in, all right, I've got this block of time. I'm just going to block it off, mark it busy, and just write something that generally says, catch up on stuff. So nobody else would understand what that means, but I do. And that's all that matters in that context. Unless I'm starting to collaborate with others, then of course that changes the whole landscape.
Fascinating. It's another area, Mark, who asked the question. Seth and I are very similar, I think, in many ways. We just use different tech. So my calendar, if you look at it, is pretty empty. It really has appointments. In other words, for me, it's the live stream, the teaching I'm doing in the Value Pricing Academy, but there's nothing else in there because that's managed by my Trello board, which is my weekly planner. And that's where all my tasks are on the Trello board. And if I need to carry something over, I just drag it into the following week. It's really, really simple. If I want to delegate it, I drag it onto Emily or Gabby or Sarah's board. So whether you use Notion, whether you use Trello, it doesn't matter. As Seth said earlier, it's the system. It's figuring out the system. And David Allen's process is really good. Anyway, we only have a few minutes left. I've got two more questions. And one is I want to find out how people can find out more about you, Seth. But before that, I guess since we've been talking about tech, one thing I do need to ask is, last year was an extraordinary year with the development of AI tools, large language models, particularly things like ChatGPT and Bard. 2024, I think, is going to be extraordinary, even more extraordinary. Where do you think the profession's heading, Seth, when it comes to AI, large language models, ChatGPT, and so on?
So everything's obviously getting smarter and more automated. And one thing I think that we're going to see, and we're starting to see it come out, and for example, for the holidays, my wife and I come from different religious backgrounds, so we don't have anything religious in our tradition, but we just get each other gifts and, do what most people do in America. So one of the gifts she got me was the Humane AI pin, which doesn't ship out till March. They started taking pre-orders in like November. But I think this is indicative of, in a very big way, where the future is going, which generally speaking is going to mean less hardware, right? You might even see over the next 5 years, I think, that in terms of, think about an accounting application like QuickBooks Online, where at this point we're accustomed to logging in and we download our bank feeds and we code things and we're using apps to automate. I could see a world where that kind of interface even is largely gone. And because I can see something like an AI technology with an LLM model where all the transactions are just brought into a server somewhere, right? And so I can use something like my Humane AI pin, and everything's already brought in and coded. And I can say, give me a report on today's transaction. So let's say I want to confirm that things are classified the way I want, right? So I can tap my little pen, say, give me that. And somewhere in some interface, it will send me that information, right? If you've seen the videos on the Humane AI pin, you can get, it will project like a little screen onto the palm of your hand. So you can get, simple information, but most of it is meant to work based on just having a conversation. Like one of the things I was taken by was this idea that I could be walking around downtown Burbank where I live. And let's say I want to capture some B-roll for a video I want to do. As I'm walking around looking at all these businesses in downtown Burbank, I can say to my pen, hey, do me a favor, shoot some B-roll for me while I'm walking around today. And it'll just record some video, and that will get uploaded to the server where my Humane AI account is. And then later I can get back to my computer and access those videos, download them, and, bring them into my video that I'm producing and edit, do whatever I want to do. Things like that. And obviously calling people and so on. And another indication, I think, that tells you that this is something to pay attention to is that the people who created the Humane AI pin all came from Apple. And now Apple is launching a competing product, like a direct competing product. I was reading an article the other day, clearly from a Mac enthusiast who's convinced that Apple's version is going to be much better, which is fine. We'll see what happens when they actually come out. But I'm fascinated by this idea of like low to no hardware tech, where it's all going to be very Minority Report. You already saw at CES, which is going on right now, that they have these huge screens that are transparent, but you can watch TV on it or access whatever you're accessing on the web, all on this transparent screen. So it is all going very much in the direction of Minority Report, where you'll just like with hand gestures move things up onto a screen and get a balance sheet and say drill into that balance sheet. There's products like Digits that are clearly at the forefront of this kind of technology that are using AI. They can go into your QuickBooks Online company, pull the data in, and help you pivot around that data in so many ways. It's already mind-blowing. It's only going to get even more mind-blowing, I think.
It is. I think we have time for one question and then my final question. Derek says, what do you think about ChatGPT and Power BI will impact on the job of accountants?
So Power BI is the Microsoft intelligence product. I believe that he's referring to. And I'm going to just say it right up front. I'm biased. I don't like Microsoft products. I am much more of a Google person, right? I like Google Sheets. I don't love Excel. We would need a whole other hour for me to get into all the reasons. But bottom line, that's where I stand. So I can't really speak to what I think about where Power BI is going to sit in this landscape. I think if anything, you're going to find, unless they're going in the direction of leveraging AI to evolve their own product, you're going to see some other product come out that, like I was just describing, will extract the data very naturally, organically, and automatically, and then cut it up for you however you want. That's what Power BI does. It's like pivot tables on steroids, to really simplify it. And things like ChatGPT, you're now seeing, there's it's neck and neck competition now between ChatGPT, which is effectively a Microsoft product, right? And then you have Google's Bard, and then Amazon has their own now. Like every big data company is now coming out with their own Meta. They're all going to try and compete for this space. It's going to be the next iteration. It's going to be just like social media, where they're all competing to be the one social media channel that everybody uses. All these same big data companies are going to compete to have the one LLM that everybody's using.
Sure. My favorite is still ChatGPT, and that's largely because in all the tests that keep being done, it's still, GPT-4 still comes out as being the best model with the least hallucination. So it's my go-to at the moment. But if I was to make a prediction, I have a feeling that by the end of 2024, certainly early 2025, probably the market leader in AI is going to be Apple. They're doing something behind the scenes. And one of the things we know about Apple is they never try to be first to market. They try to be the best. And there's no doubt they're going to embed their AI directly into Apple products with billions of users of iPhones and so on. I think we'll have AI embedded into our iPhones by the end of the year, which I think is going to be extraordinary. But we'll see. I think there's going to be. It's almost impossible to predict what December 2024 will be look like, just because the speed of change in 2023 was extraordinary. I'd not heard of 1st of January last year. I'd not heard of ChatGPT, and it's completely changed the way that I work in so many ways, and our whole business. So who knows what this year is going to unfold. Anyway, we are out of time, and I have one really important question, Seth. The final question for you is, so for people who want to find out more about you, what can they do? How can they find out more? And I think Sarah might have some links to put into the chat.
Yeah, I mean, if you just go to www.nerdenterprises.com, everything I do is laid out, I'd like to say very beautifully, by my designer, David. And you can't go 30 seconds on there without getting a prompt to opt into my list. And that's honestly the best way to stay informed about what I'm doing. I send a weekly email out. It's not BS salesy stuff. It's a message from the heart about my journey as an entrepreneur from one week to the next, what I learned and what inspired me that week.
Wow. We could have gone on much longer. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think a few other people have. Looking at the comments, I would love to chat more, but we are out of time, and I've got to wrap up with a couple of quicker announcements. So Seth, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being so open with your journey, and thank you for being so inspiring, sharing so many great tips. Okay. So a few quick things to wrap up, just to remind you, is we, and Sarah, perhaps you could put the links in again. If you want to learn more about ChatGPT and stuff, Emily and I are running a ChatGPT summit for accountants and bookkeepers on February the 1st, which I think is a Thursday. And if you want to know how to make bookkeeping much more profitable, we are running the Profitable Bookkeeping Conference. That's online, takes place Tuesday the 27th of February through to Thursday the 29th of February. Links will be in the description below, in the comments. And as usual, I'm going to play out with some music, but please put in the comments, what's the best thing that you've learned over the last hour? What's the best thing that you've learned? And if you've enjoyed the session, please give it that thumbs up as well. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you for coming along. I will see you on another live stream soon. Bye for now.
I wasted all my time, I wasted all my nights, I wasted it on someone who's indifferent. He didn't love me right. He told me I was blind, but I never really wanted to listen.